So just like I used star plots with multiple dimensions, here is what else can I do if I have 4 of those axes. So with star plots, I just place them like this. That would be a star plot. What else can I do? Here's one solution. Make them parallel. So now my 4 dimensions just look like that. They're parallel. PCP stands for parallel coordinate plots. To me, they're kind of almost the opposite, the complement to star plots in many, many ways. And so now a point, remember in a star plot, a point used to be something like this, where I hit the axis. On a parallel coordinate plot, so the first one, let's say, was 3, so I go to 3 here. Then I go to 1. Then I go back to 3. And then I go to 1. So the point is, again, I'm just linking them. It's that whole thing that goes through the parallel coordinate plot. For some reason or another, people think on this we can do more than one, so we're not going to repeat them. In this one, I only have one set of axes, and then I put points through it. So the next point may be something like this. And then I can add one more point by just connecting the axes. Okay, if I have a lot of points, so how many axes can I have? Quite a lot. Maybe I can go to 20, 30, if I just squeeze them close to each other. Well, it'll make the points a little bit harder to see, so I need some room in between. How many data points? Well, let's see. And I took this from one of the papers that claim, we use parallel coordinate plots. We're the first to say we use it for a real-world problem, and somehow they solved the problem, and here is what they used it for. They looked at 16 attributes, and it may be something, they did not disclose the company, but I think something like IBM were building integrated circuits, processors, and other integrated circuits. And if you know, or if you don't know, here it is. When they build circuits, they take, I've actually seen one of these. They take a wafer of silicon, which is like this big cylinder, and then they cut through it. Well, that's not a wafer, I'll take that back. That is the silicon. It's a big cylinder of as pure as possible silicon valley. That's why they do it. So they would go and cut a wafer. So basically just got one thin, very thin slice of this that's round. And on top of that, then they start printing circuits, the various methods. So they just print them next to each other, and at the end, they cut them off, the wafer. So out of the 16 attributes, the way I understand this, and again, I'm not a specialist in the domain of integrated circuits, but one would be the yield, is how many of these circuits are good. They use different methods to cut the wafers, to process the silicon, and to create that cylinder to start with, and maybe some other manufacturing things. So, and they took measurements. So what's the yield? How many of these circuits are actually good at all? Some of them may, if you print a circuit and there's a rock that's not silicon sitting in the middle there, it may be a microscopic one, but that whole circuit is not going to work because you just printed it. It happens to be in the middle. A rock happens to be in the middle of it. For the size of these circuits, they're not too small anyway. They're microscopic, so a microscopic defect can throw it off. The other is the quality, and I guess the best example would be you buy some CPUs that can run at 3 or 4 gigahertz. They can run really high frequencies without getting burned, and others can only do 2 gigahertz. So to me, that's the quality, is how much heat and frequency they can take before they break. And then they say they have 10 types of defects and some other proprietary materials, which we don't know in the other 4 dimensions right there, 13 through 16. So they build a parallel coordinate plot of the whole thing. It looks like a hairball. But you see x1 is here, that would be the yield, and it's all over the place. And this would be the quality of that, and then various kinds of defects, and the last 4 are proprietary, and we don't know anything about it, and the paper doesn't talk anything about it. Kind of going through it quickly. If you focus on top yield and quality, you get something weird going on here. They didn't like it. So that might not be the best way to the batches that you want to go for. So they selected only the ones. And now once you have just a few more, it becomes clearer where the problems are. So if you look for minimal defects, basically you want everything to work fine. Notice that the yield is not that great. I don't know. There's probably something that happens that doesn't produce that many. And then the quality is also all over the place. So they say, well, that's not necessarily the best thing. We need to find a compromise. And that's what they say is the best compromise. We kind of have different types of defect minimized. We have large yield and we have good quality. So the company will go for it because, and this may be financial things or I don't know, proprietary things they have in there where they modify it. So that's one example of a parallel coordinate plot. Here's another one. This is flowers, so sepal and petals for various flowers. And so one flower kind of goes this way probably, I don't know. And notice one thing, it's kind of hard to trace where it goes, one individual flower. You kind of see more of a pattern. So what kind of patterns can I see here? Let me move back to blue. For example, here I can see there's really 2 classes of petal length. Some that have higher, and there's actually no guarantee that these axes are increasing, but they do. They do increase. So some of them have long petals, the other flowers in this data set have shorter petals. Another thing that happens, if you look at the shorter ones, they tend to go up. So what you can get from it, so besides the fact that you can kind of see the distribution for each axis, you can see if there's clusters on each dimension. But the other thing, look for correlation a little bit. So looking here, you can see that the ones that have shorter petals tend to have wider sepals. So that may be an actual biological thing there that happens. But you clearly see that they kind of tend to go up. And then these that have long petals, they kind of tend to go to the narrower side of sepals. So they tend to be narrower sepals. Okay, so this pattern of X's, and you can see it a little bit here forming. What that tells you is there's an inverse correlation. May not be that the stronger it is, the more apparent that X will be. Because what happens is a lot of the things that are high on this axis tend to go low on that axis. And the opposite. So that's what causes the X. So seeing an X pattern is something that you should look for. Another pattern that may be useful, but it's a little bit harder to detect. It's just kind of, it's this one here. See, it's more of a parallel pattern that happens. It's almost, I'll show you in shortly, once I'm going to share my screen. That is really if you invert the axis, think about what happens if I take this axis and I flip it. I take the minimum and put it down. So instead of the axis going up, I can have it go down. So the smallest value will be at the top, the larger value at the bottom. If I do that, so all these points are going to start going down. All these points that were here are going to start going up. So I end up with an X, really. So the X pattern is easier to see, but it's actually if you take the X pattern and flip one of the axes, instead of going ascending, goes descending, then the X pattern becomes this parallel pattern to look for. But again, parallel pattern, I've seen it in the past. It's a little bit harder uh, to notice. Or it's a little, no, you can notice it, but it may be a false friend. Once you flip it and notice it doesn't go to an X. So the X is the best one right there. Another thing to remember, to look for, can you see any correlation between sepal length and petal length? Anything? No. It's almost impossible to see anything going, especially with this version. Again, there's versions of this. They try to make them better and better visually. But with this version, if the axes are not next to each other, you don't see any correlation. So the only correlations you have a chance of seeing are of consecutive axes. And again, going back to the order matters. Because if you don't put them in the right order, you won't be able to see those correlations, even if they exist there. So kind of keep that in mind. Ordering, ordering, ordering. The only one that seemed to be immune of ordering was the Attribute Explorer. Also, in terms of space, this doesn't seem to take a lot of space. See how many? We had 16 dimensions here. So it's not, if I add one more dimension, I'm just going to add one more axis. So it doesn't grow that much. It grows almost like Easy Chooser. Just one more little thing that I add. It's not a full panel. It's not a square thing that I need to add. It's more of a one little thing for each dimension. So that's one thing to consider. Oh, I need to go forward. Next, I'm going to share my screen. Doesn't matter which way I go. I have a demo I can show you of these parallel coordinates. And here it is. I'm back to Attribute Explorer. This version not only has the link histograms, but it has parallel coordinate plots. So what I can do with it is, again, put city miles per gallon and engine size, highway miles per gallon, horsepower, length, luggage capacity. And let's add them to a parallel coordinate plot. And here it is. So horsepower and highway miles per gallon, you kind of start to see the X happening, which you would expect. The more powerful the engine, the worse it's going to get. It feels like length and luggage capacity may be going parallel, but I don't know, I told you this is kind of sometimes a false friend. Not a lot of correlation between length and horsepower. Some, but it's not a clear X pattern. You can see clear patterns here. Engine size and highway miles per gallon, again, an X pattern. If I take this away, I can rearrange it. And now I can see highway miles per gallon and length, they tend to be correlated. I can see the X forming. Here is more of a parallel, but not quite on the engine size and horsepower. One thing I can do here is flip the axis. And now you kind of see a big X right there. I flipped horsepower to go the opposite. So, okay, the other thing that I can do dynamically, but I can do it one at a time, is pick one of the cars and see kind of how it goes. And again, I'm not sure it's very useful, but I can do it. And so that's kind of the normal way. One thing this will allow me to do is color data by, I can color it by minimum to maximum. And I think it used the horsepower to do the coloring. So this might be able to give me you can see that, well, why did it use to do the power? I don't know. color attribute. Uh, Let me select it this way. I think I can right click and say color by this axis, and then I can do minimum to maximum. Okay, so now it's clear that I colored by horsepower. Red is high horsepower and blue is low horsepower. You can kind of follow the colors. I don't know if it's that clear, but maybe. So the color will help me kind of see where the red falls on an axis that's not right next to it. But again, not sure how clear it is just because there's a lot of things that are drawn on top of each other. I mean, this red doesn't go anywhere, but I cannot even see it here. It kind of goes in the middle of the length. It's not too short of a car, not too long. So if I want to check that, I can take it and just move it next to it and flip it. And there is a little bit of an X coming up. So there is a little bit of correlation between length and horsepower. But that's what I can do kind of with parallel coordinate plots. It might end up being a hairball sometimes if I have too many of these and the colors kind of go on top of each other. Main thing I need to do as a user, not a designer, I have to kind of, if I want to look for different correlation, I kind of have to move things around. The order matters for me. If I want to explore the data, I need to place these axes next to each other. Otherwise, I cannot tell highway miles per gallon and city mile per gallon right now. I don't know what the relationship between them is. But if I take the axes and reorder them, you can see how clear the parallel pattern comes up. And if that's not clear enough, I'm going to flip it. And I get a pretty good X pattern right there, which makes sense. Most cars, mileage is related. If they do well in the city, they kind of do well on the highway and the opposite. So those are a few things you can do with the parallel coordinate plots. And again, this is already there. If you ever want to use it, you can just download it and use it. It's a Java program. It can open files. And I think the file I selected, it can even do CSV files. That's not it. So one of them is just a CSV file. The other one is a binary file.